In this episode, Lauren asks, what are the 3 biggest old school podcast marketing techniques we need to bring back? So by old school, we're talking the first age of podcasting, which is 2004 to 2010. There's basically been, 3-ish eras of podcasting. There's the original wave, which was 2004 to 2010. There was Podcast Winter, which was 2010 to 2015. There was the Serial era, which is 2016 to 2018, 2019, and then there's the modern era. The oldest of the old school techniques, there are 3 that people have forgotten about. The first one is the promo. Promos are nothing more than a 30 to 60 second ad spot that you create, and then you trade with a podcaster, presumably someone who has a similar audience or an audience you'd like to reach, and whose show is roughly about the same size as you. So back in the early days when I ran the Financial Aid podcast, I would trade promos with CC Chapman's Accident Hash. I would trade with the Daily Source Code. When it came around, Marketing Over Coffee was one of the early shows. There was this group of folks called New England Podcasters. So Clinton Alvord, Steve Garfield. I can't remember the one couple. I'm going to get in so much trouble. John Wall, Scott Monty, the old school New England folks. And we would all have promos for each other's shows. We'd run them as if they were ads. We didn't trade any money. We didn't trade any tracking codes, nothing. It was just a way to help grow the medium back in the day when there were maybe 50,000 podcast listeners total in the world, right? Because back then you needed your own podcatching software of some kind. Support for podcasts wasn't introduced into iTunes until I think it was 2005. Might have been 2006. I'd have to go back and look. So in the early days, you had to download them either by hand or with software you had to download. For podcasters, had to create their own RSS feeds by hand. So there was a very small audience. So anything that you could do to tap into other audiences of the people who were really, really podcast aficionados, promos was a great way to do it. Second thing, guest hosting. Guest hosting, again, one of those things where you would show up on somebody else's show and you would do an episode of their show as if you were them. So I guest hosted U-Turn Cafe. Did I guest host Accident Hash? I don't remember. And a few other shows. A couple of folks guest hosted my show, the Financial Aid Podcast. And it was a way for audiences to experience the hosting mannerisms of somebody else with the same content. So, for example, John Wall guest hosted the Financial Aid Podcast, and we usually did it around April Fools. That way, it was people didn't take it too seriously, and it was done in good fun and stuff. Those work really, really well because, again, it's a way to introduce people. You would typically tell your own audience, hey, next week, John's going to come do my show. I'm going to do his show, so catch me over there. And, obviously people who were already subscribed to your feed would hear the other host on your feed as well. It's a great way to share talent, to share new and different ways of people running their shows. It was a lot of fun. The third technique that I think needs to come back are collaborations. Now, this is not new. It should not sound new because obviously people have been talking for the last 10 years about YouTube collaborations and stuff, but podcast collaborations date back much, much further than that. I believe it was either 2005 or 2006 that you saw some of the first very large-scale collaborations. I want to say Adam Curry's Daily Source Code did a mass collaboration of podcasters, about 75 of them, I think, all contributing tracks, singing tracks to If Every Day Were Christmas. And I think that was 2006. Again, it was a huge, huge thing. It got some airtime. It got noticed. There was an initiative in 2007 led by Mark Nemcoff called Bum Rush the Charts, and that was to see if the Apple Music, was iTunes at the time, algorithm could be influenced by a large number of people purchasing it, recommending it, reviewing it, and stuff all on the same day. And the answer is yes. At the time, that was possible because, again, it wasn't a huge universe of people. It didn't take much more than 1,000 people to move an album. Nowadays, of course, with the size of these audiences, it's much more difficult than that. But those collaborations were ways, again, of people teaming up, pooling their resources, and being able to create content and create works that they could not have done themselves. Right? It simply was not possible for an individual or even a couple of individuals to marshal that many resources. Now, what you'll notice, and this is in some ways absent from the podcasting community to the extent that it was in the old days, all the old school techniques are based on community, on a tight-knit community of podcasters who are friends, right? New England podcasting was by no means a giant, monolithic organization. It was 15 people who hung out at Kelly's Roast Beef at the Jordan's Furniture on Route 9, once or twice a month. And just getting together and talking about what they were working on, what they were doing. Steve Garfield's Boston Media Makers, very similar type of group. The communities of podcasters were what enabled all these techniques. Today, does podcasting have the same kind of community? I would argue not as much. It does, and there certainly are groups of people who are in collectives and pods and stuff like that, but not like it used to be. Because again, it was a smaller universe, right? It was a much smaller universe. The number of listeners was a rounding error on a Nielsen chart, right? And so folks were not competing with each other. They were competing with mainstream media just to get noticed, right? Just to have anybody tune in. In your early days of podcasting, you might know each of your listeners personally, right? All 50 of them. Nowadays, it would be more difficult. When you look at all of the pitches that come in the inbox of people who want to be a guest on your podcast and stuff like that, I'm thrilled that podcasting has scaled as much as it has. I'm thrilled that podcasting is as popular and as well known as it is. But that comes at the expense of not having as tight-knit a community and of it being a much more commercial enterprise where people are charging guests to be on their show and stuff like that. Like, sell ads or something, but that's just kind of odd. And so that community is not necessarily as strong. Now, there are communities within different groups. Like, for example, Jason Falls has a podcast network, at a marketing podcast network, and Jason's one of the OGs as well. So his idea is to create that that sense of community among a niche of podcasts. HubSpot has its own podcasting community. There's a lot of different podcast communities. The thing that is missing though is that global sense where you could show up on somebody's music show and it wouldn't necessarily be the same audience, right? It wouldn't be people with similar interests. People who listened to Accident Hash or U-Turn Cafe probably didn't listen to the Financial Aid podcast, or they weren't financial aid people or parents or administrators. They were just regular folks. So to make these techniques work, you have to foster a sense of community with fellow podcasters so that you can trade things and make the exchange of value equitable among all parties. But those would be the three things that should make a comeback among communities. And I would say the community as a whole itself would be great to see come back. But really good question. If you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button.